Okay, so like I said, I'm really excited. I'm very excited to be doing this. My first introduction to Hasidic thought was through my father-in-law, Zechuso Yagein Aleinu, may his merit protect us, that he introduced to me the sefer called Baal Shem Tov on the Torah. And it was a 2-volume set, and I grabbed hold of this and started doing it according to the Parsha. Because, we all do the Parsha every week. And why not see what the Hasidic Masters has to say about the Parsha? And so, of course, he led me through it, and we did several parts together. Not everything, not every bit and piece, because it's quite extensive. And it was just an eye-opener to an amazing way. That the Torah of the Baal Shem Tov, of course, is the founder of all of Hasidic thought. He was the one who innovated. He revealed something that was already existing in Judaism, but it awakened every single Jewish heart to get close to God, to have a connection to God. And he was able to bring out the most deepest mystical concepts from the Torah, from the writings of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who wrote the Zohar, and from the Arizal, and he put it in ways where the scholar can gain tremendously from it, as well as the layman, that he was able to grasp or to help people to get a connection to God in the most simplest of ways. And that's really the way it should be, okay? Because really, the Ein Sof, God, there's nothing he can't do, and there's no heart that he cannot reach. And so for him to for the Baal Shem Tov to come out into the world at the time that he did, and to reveal what he did, offered an unbelievable awakening that still exists to this day, okay? So there's different compilations. The Baal Shem Tov never actually wrote anything on his own, okay? It was all written by his students, that he had several students. And I think not only till like 30 years after he passed away was anything ever written down. That's people had to go through basically all of the students' writings, wherever they wrote, wherever they quoted the Rabbi, so then they knew to put together the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov in that way. But other than that, it was never anything, he never wrote anything down, which is true by also the Ari. Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, the famed 16th century Kabbalist, also, he never wrote anything down. His student wrote it down. So he also didn't write anything down, but of course his students did. And so there's different collections. One is called Savatta Rivash. Savatta Rivash actually was a collection of his teachings that didn't come until, like I said, 30 years after. And then there's what's called the Keter Shem Tov. These are collections, but they didn't really have any order to them. It was like topics, okay, according to the person who put them together. I guess they had some direction in mind to put them together. But nobody really put them in some kind of order, and they're still not really in an order, okay? So it says here, yes, the Keter Shem Tov, that's called the Crown of the Good Name, was the first published work of the teachings of Rabbi Yisrael, Baal Shem Tov. And that was in 1794, more than 30 years after Israel's passing. And then there was the Savatta Rivash, and that was 1792 or 93, which is like a year before. And that was also a collection. But what we are doing now, let me just get it here. And the Baal Shem Tov on the Torah actually is a collection from a rabbi, Rabbi Shimon Menachem Mendel Wodnik, okay, who put together the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov, went through some 600 volumes, collecting every single place where he was mentioned. And he put it together in the order of the Parsha. So here you can actually have like a link to the Parsha through as a gateway to the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov. Somewhat orderly, and listen, that's how I was introduced to it. So I find it to be the most profound. But like I say, I didn't do every single piece, so some of these we're going to be exploring together, okay? So on the sheets that I gave to you, that I handed out, was basically on Genesis. As we start with last week's Parsha, And we're going to go, by the way, we're going to go to Genesis probably the whole year, okay? There's a big chunk on Genesis where he goes through the verses. And of course, we know the innovative teaching of the Baal Shem Tov was the fact that he says the Torah is nitzchi. That means it's eternal. That means it has a relevance for us in the here and now. And so every single thing that he was teaching was bringing the Torah into the here and now and giving it its meaning and relevance. And so the very first Torah that I bring to you in Genesis, right, is about Bereshit, in the beginning, right? That magic word Bereshit, which even Rashi is puzzled. By the way, there's several names for the Baal Shem Tov. We call him the Baal Shem Tov. That literally means the master of a good name. And the reason why it's the master of a good name was, at that time, they had a lot of people, healers, going around, healing people and doing wonders. They would call those people Baal Shem, master of a name. Okay? It's kind of an interesting way to call it, but I guess the idea was that you could use names of God, right? In a certain sense, that was not looked up, that was actually looked down upon by most rabbis, because to use practical Kabbalah at the time was a big no-no. Now, I think Shabtai Tzvi was like some 50, maybe 100 years before that, but still, all Judaism frowned upon using practical Kabbalah. Actually, there's a great story that the Baal Shem Tov, he would hand out kameas. You've ever heard of what a kamea is? A kamea is an amulet. An amulet is like a charm. You write on a piece of parchment, fold it up, put it in a little leather pouch. I had one, I know. I got one from a Kabbalist, right? And they wear it, or you have it on you, or whatever. And he was writing these, having these amulets written, right? And giving it to people for healing, prosperity. And of course the rabbi is going like, what are you doing? How could you be doing this? They always came on him, right? They always came down on him. Don't forget, this guy was a whippersnapper. He was an upstart, right? He was dancing, right? He was like rejuvenating Israel with a different twang of practice of how to connect to God. That it was not like the classical way that they were doing it. And here he was, Mr. Kabbalist, writing amulets and handing them out. Do you know what happened? One time they got hold of one of those amulets and they opened it up to see what the holy names of angels they thought was going to be written inside. And what was written in there? You remember, you guys, any of you know? It was written Rabbi Yisrael ben Rebbe Eliezer. His name? Just a name, just my name, right? But we'll see there's very deep things in that, okay, as we're going to see today, okay? So, let's just not talk about necessarily how he came into this world and through the merits of how he came to this world. But we do thank God that him and all of the holy rabbis are there to teach us always. So I have here the first Torah. The first Torah was his Bereshit, where he says like this: when the Mashiach comes, which probably will be this year, the way things are going now, I please Hashem, when the Mashiach comes, may it be speedily in our days, he will expound upon the letter combinations of each word of the Torah, from the beginning to the end. In other words, he's going to go into every single word, word by word, and he's going to take those letters, and we're going to talk about what it means by tziruf ha'otiot, or tziruf ha'tevot, which is a recombination or a smeltering or combinations of words of the Torah. He's going to go through each word of the Torah and recombine it and bring out a new revelation, okay? For each and every word, he's going to recombine the letters, right, from the beginning into the end. That's revelation number one that Mashiach will do. And you might ask a question, why? Okay, it's cool. Okay, hey, I love a good class, but okay, why? Okay? I can understand it's a great thing, but it's like, this is the first thing that the Baal Shem Tov wants to teach you about Bereshit. And after that, that's revelation number 1, each and every word combination, recombining every word. He will then join the entire Torah into one word. That's one long word. So that the letter permutations will be without number. And then he will expound, that's number 3, on all of the combinations. In other words, first he's going to go word by word, and then he's going to combine all the words to one word, and then he's going to re-permutate everything ad ein sof to expound upon all these combinations. Okay? 3 things. Okay? The most amazing thing is, okay, why? And what is it about? And what's the real thing? And we always have to go, and I always teach this. We don't really get an idea of what the Torah is until the last 5 verses of the Torah. Okay? Only in the last 5 verses of the Torah, oh, somebody's in the waiting room. Only in the last 5 verses in the Torah do we figure out what the Torah is. Okay? So that's what I gave to you. I sent you via email the next sheets. Okay? Because we really have to start to perceive the Torah, because we all came from an upbringing of what the Torah is, and we understand it's a rule, and the moral codes, and the laws, and the mitzvahs, and all of that is great stuff. But we really have to understand, what is this communique from the infinite that we all experienced 4,000 years ago? And we're all really experiencing it right now, okay? So that's where we go to the end of the Torah. After we've learned the Torah, we go to the end of the Torah to find out what is the Torah really about. So if you look in the second sheets I gave you, where it says that this, and Moshe died. I think you guys have it in the sheets that I sent. And Moshe died in the plains of Moab. They don't know where Moshe's buried. Okay? We're not allowed to know where Moshe's buried. I think the reason everybody knows is because that people would worship his grave, and he didn't want that. That's why Yaakov Avinu also did not want to stay in Israel, in Egypt. He had to be buried in the Holy Land because people were going to worship his grave. So it says here, it writes here, and so Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab according to the word of God. And then it brings down that he was buried, right? And then, there was never a prophet in Israel like Moses. His strength was always there, and the people mourned for him, and he was the one who brought the Torah to Israel. The last 5 verses in the Torah. So the question here that they ask, could Moses, and this is from Rashi, the simple Pashtanim, the people who just interpret the Torah, because it has the languages, Moshe died there. It's past tense. So could Moshe have already died when he wrote and Moses died? Doesn't seem like that's true. If Moses is dead, it can't be his hand gone up and just wrote on the scroll the last 5 verses, okay? Rather, Moses wrote up until this point, and from then on Yeshua wrote. That's the first opinion. So Moses wrote all the Torah until the last 5 verses, and then Yeshua finished it. But Rabbi Meir says he has a problem with that. Rabbi Meir says, is it possible that the Sefer Torah that Moses wrote was lacking something? Right? Because Moshe said to the Bnei Israel, he said, take this Sefer Torah. He gave every single tribe a Sefer Torah, a complete Sefer Torah. Not, I'm giving you this, and the last 5 verses, we're going to do a recall, and you're going to come back, and we're going to fill it in. No. when he gave the 12 tribes a Sefer Torah, it was a complete Sefer Torah. He says, take this Sefer Torah. So then how do we answer? According to Rabbi Meir, this question punches you in the face. It can't be Moses and Yeshua wrote it, because Moses gave a complete Sefer Torah before he passed away. So rather, the Holy One dictated it and Moses wrote it in tears. The classic, everybody touches everybody's heart. That Moshe wrote it as he was crying. He wrote it in tears, those last 5 verses. But the Baal Shem Tov quickly moves forward with this, and he sees this is not a correct answer. Why? These holy words do not seem to have any meaning. Rashi asks simply, could Moses have already died? For it is impossible to say that he was alive when he wrote and Moses died, because it's not true. The Torah has to be a Torah of truth, okay? If the Torah is not true, right? If the Torah is true, it can't be that Moshe would write and Moses died. It wouldn't be that way. It can't be that way, okay? If it wrote, and Moses will die, then okay, you can get away with it. But the way that the verse wrote, and Moses died there, is problematic, okay? It can't be that Moses wrote it while he was dead. Or maybe, I don't know. So one must say that he was dead, which makes Rashi's question a good one. But how did Rashi answer it? By saying that Moses wrote it in tears? Does the fact that he wrote it in tears help? It's not answering the question. You have to lose a little critical thinking here. The original question still applies. How did he write and Moses died while he was still alive? In other words, so he uses black ink or tear ink. What ink are you using to write that down? Are you alive and you write and Moses died there? It doesn't fit because it has to be true. Okay? So therefore, it doesn't matter what kind of what you used as ink, whether you used tears as ink, or whether you used ink, black ink. You used ink, so you were alive, so you were writing it, so you were writing in that. It didn't answer the question. Okay? You got to think about this. So he wrote it in tears as the answer. Everybody just gets hit with the tears business, and everybody just walks away. But nobody really thinks about it. That it doesn't really answer the question. Okay. So you have to understand it really comes from the word dema. Okay, the word in Hebrew, right? Dema, right, or demaot, means tears, demaot, has another meaning that the Baal Shem Tov brings out, okay? And now he's going to go through an understanding of what the Torah is, okay? So here on page 185, this is indeed how it was. This is so important because you have to get a basis of what we are connecting to, okay? For it is an amazing thing to everyone how the Torah preceded the creation of the world by 2,000 years. Okay? That there's a verse in the Torah, Vahiti etzlo sha'ashuim yom yom. I was a plaything or as a crafting tool by him day. Right? I was his craft tool day. This is the Torah talking about how Hashem has used him, right? As we know, the Torah is the blueprint of creation. But the expression that the Torah is saying about God was, Haiti etzlo sha'ashuim, I was his plaything. Really, it literally means sha'ashua. A sha'ashua in Hebrew is toy, okay? But they kind of use it as amon, Haiti amon etzlo sha'ashua. Okay, so the idea here is yom yom, day. And just like we learned in last week's Parsha, day in the life of God is 1,000 years. Okay? Day is 1,000. Day 2 is 2,000 years. Day implies 2,000 years. Just like we learned in this week's Parsha, where Adam and Chava ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and the angels went to God and go, hey, he's got to die today, right? Because you said the day that he eats it, he's going to die. And Hashem says, of course, that's my days I'm talking about. Yeah, little men, okay? Little, angel men, okay? So basically it was that Adam was supposed to live 1,000 years. Of course, he didn't. He only lived 930 years because he gave 70 years of his life for King David to exist, which is really what we're getting into, which is really cool. When you think of Adam and you spell out the letters of Adam, Aleph, Dalet, and Mem, Aleph, Dalet, Mem spell Adam. Aleph is Adam, the Dalet is David, and Mem is Mashiach. So the string of this ultra power soul, connecting soul, that strings through all of humanity, really is the same soul of Adam Rishon, having three different expressions, okay? This collective soul, okay? In any case, getting back here, okay? The world was created, the creation of the world, right? The Torah preceded the creation of the world 2,000 years, okay? The Torah preceded the creation of the world by 2,000 years.
Rabbi.
Okay, so if the Torah preceded the world by 2,000 years, for how were all the holy stories of the Torah written then about the creation of the world, Adam and Eve, Noah, the holy forefathers, and all of the other things that from Bereshit in the beginning all the way until the last words of the Torah in the eyes of all of Israel? Those events had not yet occurred. Okay, that's number one. In other words, God gave free choice. The most important ingredient in creation is called free choice. We never let go of it. Okay? And we do have the freedom to choose what to think, say, and do every single moment. And Adam had the same thing, and Avram Avinu, Noah, and all of the generations. And so if the Torah was written 2,000 years before creation, I don't get it. Okay, so you get to say Hashem in his super infinite knowledge. Of course, you can say that. Super infinite knowledge knew exactly what was going to happen, right? Before it happened, and it was written in the Torah. But it doesn't really sit well with free choice, okay? Not by the way, free choice, it's a problem. It's a philosophical issue which is not really solvable with our limited level of consciousness. But in any case, the question he's saying is, if the Torah was written 2,000 years before creation, how do we have all the stories that happened? Even more problematic, I'm going on in the text, is the fact that death only entered the world with the sin of Adam. Had he not sinned, there would be no death. Period. Okay? He had free will. He did not have to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, even though it was quite tempting. It was almost like in your face. It's like the fruit was like almost shoved in his face. Like, don't eat that one, right? The whole thing was like an unbelievable agenda type of manifestation that was going on in the Garden of Eden. Okay? But still, how can it be that since there was free choice and Adam did not have to sin by eating the tree of knowledge of good and evil, how was the topic of death written in the Torah? Right? So far in advance, 2,000 years. How can God be writing about death in the Torah when you don't know what Adam is going to do? You really don't know. Do you really know? Free will or not free will? Okay? Right? For instance, so-and-so died. You'll see it in the Torah all the time. This person dies, this person dies, this person dies. It's all over the place. This whole thing about death, it's written when a man dies in a tent, right? So Adam had not yet sinned. And even though everything is foreseen by God, yes, we do say that, we never say permission is granted. You can eat or you cannot eat, okay? Permission is granted for individuals to act as they choose, okay? So we had two questions here. We see if the Torah was written 2,000 years before creation, how do we see in front of us all of the stories, right? How is that, right? And then if the Torah was written 2,000 years before creation and it writes about death, well, wait a minute. Adam didn't necessarily have to eat from the tree of knowledge, and it would be fine, and there wouldn't be any death, okay? He was supposed to live forever. So here we go. The truth is that the Holy Torah was originally created only as a mass of letters. I hate to get into those guys who like, oh no, the letters again, Rabbi. Don't give me the letters. You got to get into the letters. The Hebrew language is not like any other. It's not just another language, okay? The truth is that the Holy Torah was originally created only as a mass of letters. In other words, as my father-in-law puts it, a cosmic alphabet soup in the sky, okay? Random energies that we will call letters, okay? Now, letters are very powerful. It brings down in Sefer Yetzirah, right? That Sefer Yetzirah brings down that, it calls the letters stones to build a house. 2 stones build 4 houses. 3 stones, right, build 6, right? So because of the combinations of letters, you can do different permutations with these energies. Once again, the Hebrew letters are very powerful, and I always call them the primordial energy fields of creation, okay? In other words, before that, we know the Torah is the blueprint of creation. But what was written before the Torah? The letters. Because in order to make the Torah, you have to have letters first. So the letters have to be there first. What are these letters? So now go back. In the beginning, the Torah, and you have to understand now, what is it then? Originally created only as a mass of letters. All the letters from in the beginning, Bereshit, until the last letters, Einei Kol Yisrael, all the eyes of Israel, were not arranged into the words that we see today. Such as, in the beginning, God created, or go from your land, Lech Lecha, what he said to Avram Avinu. Rather, all these words were mixed together. He calls them words. Really, it was letters that are mixed together. Jumble. That's the classic concept. Okay? Then, whenever something happened in the world, due to people's free choice, these letters arranged themselves into patterns of words, and a story was created from the event. In other words, here he says, for instance, with the creation of the world and the story of Adam and Eve, those letters drew close to one another and formed those words that related this event. In other words, when Adam was reaching for the tree of knowledge of good and evil, those letters of the storyline, the function of those letters came and formed the storyline that we have. Okay? You got to start to think now. What is the Torah? So likewise, when someone died, the words were formed, and so died. So too, when other events occurred, words of Torah were immediately formed from those letters according to the act. When Avram went out from his house, so it says Avram went out from his house, with the choices that every single person was making, the letters would then fall into the place in the form of the Torah that we have today. I think we've gone through this before, but it's always good to get it in the text, okay? Had a different event occurred, the letter combinations would have been different. For the Holy Torah is the wisdom of God and has no end. In other words, I've explained this before. When Adam and Eve were in the Garden of Eden, they had this consciousness level called Tamimut. They were Tam. Tam means like whole, okay? They were simple, simply whole, not complicated, not sophisticated. God said X, we do X, not thinking too deeply in it, okay? That's called whole. You know, we have a mitzvah in the Torah, right? Tamim tiyeh im Hashem Elokecha, you have to be whole with God. Now Rashi translates that basically as, don't look into astrology in the future, or storytellers and tarot cards about what your day is going to be, or your month, or your year. Because you know something, you just got to go whole with God, okay? Not thinking, when Avraham was the master, when Avraham had to buy a burial place for his wife, Sarah, right? He had to pay like $400,000 for a hole in the ground, right? So he didn't go to God and go, "Wait, you told me you were going to give me this land, man. What you doing, man? I thought I was going to give it, and I had to go ahead and pay that much money." He did not complain to God. He accepted it without thinking. He went and said, "This is the flow. Go with the flow." That's Tam. Adam and Eve were Tam, whole. It's a very high level of consciousness. You think it's not, because usually most people will associate the person who's whole like that as being a happy idiot, okay? But he's happy. At least he's happy, okay? But most people will call that guy an idiot or a fool, okay? So then Adam and Eve are in the garden, and they're Tam, tough men. And they're chilling, and I don't know where Adam was. He went to sleep, or he was, I don't know what he was doing. Going to get some fertilizer for, I don't know. And the serpent comes and talks to Eve. And the serpent basically convinces Adam and Eve and says, you know, Hashem doesn't want you to eat from that tree, right? Because you're lacking. He wants you to stay lacking. You're lacking. If you would eat from that tree, then you'll be whole. He sold him a good line. You're not whole now. But if you eat from that tree, then you will be complete. You're not really complete now. So therefore, he sold them an idea. It's very important. He sold them this idea of that they were not whole, and that in order to be whole, they must eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And because Adam bought into this idea, therefore, everything crashed, of course. But they lost their tough mem, Tam. The letters were switched. What happens when you switch tough and mem? You get mace. You get dead. You get dead. That's death. Okay? So Adam and Chava, they were Tam. They bought into the idea that they weren't Tam. And therefore they brought death into the world. Which is the reason also why Kohanim are not allowed to go into cemeteries. Just a side point. Kohanim have to keep their tamimus dik, their tamimusness, their simple wholeness, a connection. And they get too complicated when they go into cemeteries because we start to get messed up with death. Okay? So, in any case, that's what the Shem Shmuel says. So the idea here is the letter combinations. Letters are very important. And if you don't know how to read Hebrew, right, then you have to start learning. Even if it's just you read a verse a day, or you read in the Siddur every day some Hebrew, right? It is so powerful because these letters are energies. And they're the creational energies. When we say the word Baruch in a simple blessing, that Baruch is a vibration. The letters are a vibration, a creational, a powerful building block, an even, a stone that makes a building. They're a creational vibration that puts whole things together. And when you say, and I said this to my father-in-law, when I'm davening, sometimes I have in mind, if I remember, Baruch, the word Baruch, the bait has a vibration instantly all around me. The bait that is in all the physical existence that is around me becomes awakened. And the Baruch and the Resh of Baruch and the Vav and the Chaf Sofit, obviously what happens is when I just say the word Baruch, all that is around me, and you can extend that to the entire universe. Really, with your mind. The mind is so powerful. The word Baruch, obviously every single element in creation that was with those letters, where those letters are contained, become ignited. Okay? And with the kavanah, with the intention of your mind, you elevate them. But just getting back to the idea of this, what we call, or what Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan calls the Primordial Torah. This Primordial Torah, basically, was a alphabet soup of energies in the sky. That is what God wanted to give us. Okay? And the way that it's manifest to us now in the story form was because of the choices of all of the holy men and the non-holy men. And all of the choices that they were making. And that takes the form of the letters and of that we have in front of us now. But really, there's a much higher Torah to grasp. That is the energies of the letters and the combination of the letters. We have to start to take the red pill, folks, okay? Because it's like, existence is way more than what we can possibly imagine. Infinity, we have no concept. And there's many forms of communique and connection that God has in store for us. And to get the idea about this primordial Torah and the energy of the letters is the start. Okay, to understand that there is energy and information that we are working on connecting to. Okay, so far right now in our world, in our dimension, we have the Torah with Moses, Abraham, and every single thing that happens in the form, but there's much higher energies to connect to. Okay, going on here in the text on the bottom of 186, it turns out that when the time came for Moses to die, because we have to answer the question now, the entire Torah, up until Moses died, had already been arranged into the words, because, you have to think about it, really. Moses went into the tent, and he had a blank parchment, and he had his quill and his ink, and God would show him his book. This is God's copy, so to speak, which is, who knows what it was, light. And Moses would copy letter for letter. And don't forget, when they were in Mount Sinai, okay, all the stories that happened later didn't happen yet with Korach, the spies, right? The Chet HaEgel, all that didn't happen yet. So they only had, in terms of, let's say, give us the Torah, Moses, give us the Torah, they only had Genesis, right? Bereit Genesis, the book of Genesis, and a couple of parshas of Exodus. They didn't have the whole thing. It was still in the process of being written. So for all these events that had already transpired, so that's until the last 5 verses in the Torah, every single thing had transpired. Only the letters of the words, so Moses died, until in the end of the eyes of all Israel, had not been arranged into words because Moses was still alive. However, it was necessary for Moses to write all the words of the Torah, as it says, Moses said the day he died, take this Sefer Torah, which means that it needed to be complete. And furthermore, it is called by his name, because it says, remember the Torah of Moses, my servant. It doesn't say Moses and Yeshua. It's not called the book of Moses and Yeshua. It's just called the book of Moses, 5 books of Moses. Okay? So when Moses gave a Sefer Torah, it was a complete Sefer Torah. So what then did God do? He told Moses the letters that remained as they were, still intermingled, without being combined into words. And this is how Moses wrote them. Okay, so in other words, he wrote jumbled letters. Later, when he died, the letters immediately formed the words from the verse, and Moses died until in the eyes of all of Israel. Thus, Moses did write the entire Torah, And it is correct to say, when he said, take this Sefer Torah, to be called by his name, Moses' name, not Moses and Yeshua. For he really did write the entire thing from beginning to end. But it was just the last 5 verses were jumbled. And this is what Rashi wrote. People don't understand this Rashi. If you don't have the Baal Shem Tov, you'll be telling people he wrote it in tears and you'll just move on. But this is what Rashi wrote. That God dictated it to Moses and Moses wrote it. However, so as to avoid the problem as to how Moses wrote, he wrote, right, and he died while still being alive. Rashi explains that Moses wrote it in tears. The word tears is the same root it's called dima. Dima. Also has the meaning of admixture. As in hamidameh or truma midma'as. That means classically in halachic terms, when we would have some regular food that an Israel eats, becomes mixed with truma, which is special consecrated food only for the priests, and we would take the regular food that Israel eats and mix it, it becomes jumbled and then it becomes what we call an admixture. It's called truma midmas. It became mixed, it became blended, okay? So then there's another root for the word dima. So that means the way that the Baal Shem Tov is understanding it, that Moses wrote it b'dima, no, not tears, how everybody translates it. It's mixed. He wrote it as a series of jumbled letters that did not have any meaning. He wrote the letters down with his hands, okay? So too Moses wrote it a letter at a time, mixed together. After he died, the words were formed. Now, I'm just guessing here, and I'm just making an assumption here, that the letters on the parchment itself moved into the form or the order that they needed to move into. Or someone would read it and then grasp how everything has to be put into the proper order that reads as we have it now. So Moses died until all the eyes of Israel understand this, okay? So the idea here of what we grasp is, what is the Torah? But we understand the Torah is the blueprint of creation. And we understand that in order to make the blueprint of creation, you have to have the letters first. And what are these letters? Okay? So we have to start to get into the primordial Torah, a higher level of Torah. Okay? I was talking to my friend and mentor, Shalom Gold. He's been basically in his house for 7 months. He's an elderly Rav in the old city of Jerusalem. And very, very few, very, very rare times would he go out, totally closed in, and very, very, into meditation and study. And he says, the reason why that we are in this situation that we need to be in is for us to communicate in different ways. So we're so used to communicating in these classic ways that we've been doing so far. But now it's a time to go within and use our minds and to connect in a different way with people, with each other, okay? So now going back to Bereshit, okay? Going back to Bereshit, now that we understand what the Torah is, we're going to go now into Torah 1, which we started off. That here we are. We understand that there's a series of jumbled letters in its primordial form, and then we have the form of the Torah and the storyline that we have. And so now we get a little understanding here. When the Mashiach comes, may it be speedily in our days, he will expound upon the letter combinations of each word in the Torah. Okay? So just to give you an idea of a combination of what it means to recombine. So I learn the Sefer Tikkunei Zohar pretty much every day. I do a little bit of it. The Tikkunei Zohar was written by Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, and basically, I guess you could call it, 200 BCE, maybe even before that. I'm not sure. But in any case, the Tikkunei Zohar, which literally I don't know how to translate that, Tikkunei, like rectifications, It's basically what we call an extract of the Zohar itself. The Zohar itself is the 5 books of Moses, the esoteric commentary of those 5 books. And then there's what we call the extract, which is Tikkunei Zohar. Basically, it's 70 chapters just on the first word of Bereshit, Genesis, okay? In the beginning, okay? And it basically goes through different letter combinations of the word Bereshit. That if you take the letters, you can recombine the letters and get different meanings. And I got a couple of here, okay? Like, let's say if you take Yireh Boshes, if you take the letter and recombine the letters of Bereshit, you get 2 words. Yireh, which means fear, Boshes, embarrassment, okay? Which is basically a level of consciousness, basically an awareness of God to such an extent where a person has the busha, healthy busha, healthy, we'll call it healthy embarrassment, okay? Not toxic shame, healthy shame, okay? A healthy level. Another one is Brit Eish. If I take the letters of Bereshit and recombine them, I get Brit, which means covenant, Eish, fire, covenant of fire. And there's also another one, Rosh Bait, head of house. Interesting. Now there's all deep meanings into all of these. Yireh Shabbos. If I take the combinations of the word Bereshit, I get Yireh Shabbat, which is like an awe of Shabbat. There's also Barashit, created 6, okay, which is the 6 Sfirot. And then there's Bat Roshi, Bat Roshi, daughter in my head. These are meditative things. But I'm just telling you, wanted to show you, that's one form of letter combinations, okay? That's one just word of Bereshit, and to form different concepts of each word, okay? So if you look here in the commentary, so he says here, the letters of the Torah, though inscribed in a pattern that tells the story of creation of the world and the history and laws of the Jewish people, are not fixed. It is possible to rearrange the letters to gain new insights into the meaning of the text and God's will for man. Furthermore, the letters of the Torah represent the creative energies, like I told you, of God that enter the world, and arranging them into different patterns can affect the flow of energy from above. Now, I told you beginning that there was a story of the Baal Shem Tov. He was writing amulets. Some of you came late. He was writing amulets, and that's practical Kabbalah. The rabbis were getting on his case. They get on his case anyways. But this was like he went beyond. Okay, he crossed the line here. You don't write kameas. You don't do practical Kabbalah. And they opened the kameas that he was handing out to people, and all it had was his name on it, which his full name was Rabbi Yisrael ben Rabbi Eliezer. But you'd understand the Baal Shem Tov, he understood the names and the letters, and the creative aspects of the letters are very, very, very powerful. If you get nothing else out of today, just to understand that the letters themselves, the vibrational, creative aspects of the letters are extremely powerful. So when we connect to Torah, we say Torah, we read Torah. Or when we daven, those letters that we say are stones that become bricks, that become houses. They are creative forces that we are connected to. And even if you don't connect to it the way that the holy sages and the Kabbalists do, it doesn't matter just to say it. Now, there's some other school of Kabbalah, which I won't mention, that goes into scanning, which you may be familiar with. Okay? We don't hold by scanning, even though, hey, if you're going to look at holy letters, I guess that's better than looking at some other things that you shouldn't be looking at. But in terms of, let's say, the spiritual aspect of the letters, just to look at the letters, it's not going to really do and have any spiritual effect. But to say the letters are very, very powerful. Okay? So here, he goes on in the note here. By meditating on the letters in their different combinations, mystical states of consciousness can be attained. Period. Okay? There are various techniques for letter combinations, when we call it, such as tziruf osios, letter recombination, or gematria, using the numerical value of each Hebrew letter. Roshe tevos, that's the first letter. Let's say if you pick a verse in the Torah, and every first letter of the Torah of that verse forms a name of God. Also, we call sofe tevos. You take, let's say, a verse in the Torah, and the last letter of each one of those words also forms a holy name. We don't know what it is. As a matter of fact, there's a prayer when you read Psalms. You read Psalms. There's a prayer you say after you read Psalms, and you say the Roshe Tevos, meaning the acronym of the words that we say. There's holy names in all of this that we're not familiar with. But when you say them, you hit them. It's a vibration. It resonates in the entire universe. Okay? So here, going on here, and the division of the letters into their component parts, thus there is an infinite amount of meaning that can be derived in the Torah. Okay? Now, I happen to read from of this very long text over the holiday from Itamar Schwartz. He's the one who wrote the Sefer Bilvavi. And he actually did a commentary of Bereshit, I think just the Parsha of Bereshit, of the Baal Shem Tov. And he explains the Mashiach, that when he comes, and what is this combination stuff? What is it? What is it about? Why does he have to do that, right? So the idea really is how do you make, when you're really, in a certain sense, combining one letter with another, it's not so easy to do. You can't just interchange a letter, an aleph with a bait, and a bait with an aleph. An aleph is an aleph, and a bait is a bait. Where do you get? So, but, however, he says, the level of consciousness of the Mashiach comes from a consciousness called ayin. Ayin means a state of nothingness. It's a pre-state beyond and before anything could have existed. This level of soul, what it does basically is, which is really a combination of all of our souls, okay? Where all are connected to him. What he does is each letter, when he shows us all this state, this consciousness level called ayin, or nothingness, or nullification, right? Because we are all being created something from nothing. And when we experience that nothingness, all things go back to the root. And when it comes out from the root and it becomes manifest, in the root, everything can be recombined, okay? And then drawn down, okay? So the idea of joining each word from beginning to end is really indicative of, okay, we're all souls. We're all manifestations. We're all expressions. But he wants to tell us, each and every one of us, us creation, about the ultimate expression. But first he starts with the individuality of the words and the combination of the words. And only then, after that, comes revelation number 2. And that is, then, he will join the entire Torah into one word. Okay? It's almost as if he sucks the spaces from between the letters, right? Into one long, really the Torah, it's known, it's one long name of God. The entire Torah is one long name of God, as it says here in the note. See, Zohar 3, the Torah is all the holy name of the Holy One, blessed be He. The Torah is really all one name of God. Fortunate is the lot of one who merits it. He's bringing down one who merits the Torah, merits the holy name. Okay? See also Bris Menucha about this. They said that the entire Torah is all one name, and all the words are names that can cause effects. Hey, notice how it brings down something very powerful here. Okay? Because the idea here is that we have to get to the name of God. Okay? Yud K Vav K. I say this all the time. Yud K, the letters Yud and Hey, are letters that represent the mind, okay? The elements of the mind. The yud is like the initial thought, and the hey is the expression of that thought. But it's still all mental. The vav and the hey, the last two letters of the name of God, is the expression, is the potential, expressed potential of that thought. So I always tell you what the definition of Yud K Vav K is, and it means basically thought manifest. Thought manifest. Okay? That means we're created in the image and likeness of God. That means we think, we bring about, hopefully. Okay? So when we think, we manifest. Okay? It's a natural part of us. Okay? But the idea is to harness it. But first, that's why the Mashiach, in terms of his second revelation, he wants to combine it all into one word, okay? And that one word is basically bringing us to a state, according to Rabbi Schwartz, of pure potentiality, for us to experience the potential, okay? Just to experience what the potential is. If you were now taught that, and it became absolutely true, and you absolutely resonated with it 24/7, that your thoughts create your reality, it's very important then to take a step back and think about not necessarily what you've been creating, all the mess that you've gotten yourself into all this time, but now what is the potential that I can create from that? And that is what the Mashiach does by gathering all the letters, all of the words into one word, right? That is like to teach us about our potential, that it's limitless. Ein Sof potential. Can you imagine that? Okay? Now, to go into something else that I wanted to get into, okay? Just 1 second, my notes here. Okay. Ein od milvado. The third revelation that he gets us to is that there's nothing else other than God, but in a concrete way, in a way that sticks. The way I understand it is that he's going to show us the Torah, that the Torah basically is the projection of creation. And I've gone through this before, that if you imagine the projector, the film, and the screen, that we see the world as the screen, we see the film as the Torah, and then we see the light as the light of God. But the Mashiach is going to show us not only the individual aspects that are on the screen and how they hook up to the creation, but he's also going to show us the film and also connect us to the original light of God. Okay? In other words, how we are connected not only to the screen and the world through the words of the Torah and the combinations thereof, but also through the film of the Torah being one film, okay, so to speak. Interestingly enough, the one word, the white and the black, he got through something really quite fascinating when you do a combination of letters. Just honor me for a couple more minutes here. To switch the letters, I said, is not such an easy thing. An aleph and a beit, an aleph takes up certain space on the parchment. To make a beit out of that, you got to make the dark spots of the aleph, and you have to make, what was black now is white, and what was white is now black. You understand? How do you do that? So in the concept of the Mashiach, that he's able to turn black into white, white fire into black fire, and black fire into white fire, through the concept of nothingness. Okay? And that's why they say, interestingly enough, that the Mashiach, when he comes, he'll be coming riding on a white donkey. Maybe you've heard that before. There's two versions. One is he comes on a cloud, or in one version is he comes riding on a white donkey. And I think they solved the issue is that he's coming on a white cloud. That's if we merit. In other words, if we do what we're supposed to be doing, then he comes riding from a cloud. And if we don't merit, he comes riding on a white donkey into the gates of Jerusalem. Of course, they understand that and they interpret it differently. When he's riding on a white chamor, the word for chamor means also not donkey, but means also physicality. And the fact that he's coming on a white chamor, which means that he refines the chumriyut, what we call the physicality, okay? So in other words, the physicality that we experience, that we were thinking is maybe dark fire or black fire, he turns it white, okay? That's what I get the sense of. That all of the darkness that we've experienced in all of our lives are really white fire, black fire. He's able to unite them to show you that it's all one and the same, okay? So with that, that's what the Baal Shem Tov, that's how he wants to start Sefer Bereshit, by telling us that the letter combinations in the Torah are very deep and very powerful. And that to say letters of Torah, words of Torah, letters of prayer, words of prayer are very, very powerful. And we don't necessarily know the combinations of all of those letters, but we have to understand that, there's that famous story. I'll leave you with this last story. It's a great story. It's one of the classic stories. Everybody's heard it, right? I think it was the Baal Shem Tov, and he was praying, and there was a kid who came in. He didn't know how to pray. All he did was kept saying Aleph Beit, Gimel Dalet Hey Vav Zayin, right? And it was Yom Kippur, and he comes in and he sees everybody fervently involved in praying, and this kid, he doesn't know how to pray, he doesn't know how to read Hebrew. But the only thing he can say is Aleph Beit Gimel Dalet Hey Vav Zayin Chet Tet, and he keeps on going over the alphabet and over the alphabet. People are going, looking at him, going, psh, punk, quiet, right? We're trying to pray here, right? And he didn't listen to them, right? And the Baal Shem Tov said in the end, if it wasn't for that kid saying those letters, man, we would have been done. We had decrees against us. That man, we were trying to avert those decrees. And if that kid didn't come in with the Aleph Beit, just saying Aleph Beit with all his heart and soul, man, we would have been wiped out, okay? So you have to thank God for that. It was another story. They say a very similar thing about a kid playing a flute, right? The idea really here is the Aleph Beit, the famous Aleph Beit story, that even if you can't read so clearly, you do the best you can, but the letters are very, very, very powerful. In the Torah, there's a primordial energy field of energy and information that we have to connect to. Okay, we're going to end here.